Welcome to the Radiology Review podcast, your on-the-go source for radiology education with your host, Dr. Matt Covington, a board-certified radiologist. Please follow the podcast on Twitter at RadRevPodcast. Send emails to theradiologyreview@gmail.com or visit the website theradiologyreview.com.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today I am discussing answers for the question, how do you safely receive a shipment of radioactive materials? Here is the process, step by step. First, wear gloves and a radiation monitoring badge. Second, inspect the package for visual signs of damage or leak. If the package does in fact appear damaged, your next step is to notify your radiation safety officer. Next, check for external radiation, first at 1 meter, typically using an ion chamber detector, and then at the surface using a wipe test. The radiation level at 1 meter must fall below that of the transportation index, which is indicated on the shipping label in the small rectangular box towards the bottom. The shipping label is a diamond label, and you will look for the number within the rectangular box towards the bottom. If you do not know where to identify the transportation index, please look this up. That is necessary and commonly tested information on board examinations. If the radiation level that you detect at 1 meter is much different than what is shown on the transportation index, you must notify your radiation safety officer and await instructions. When you are measuring the radiation level at 1 meter, an ion chamber is a better choice than a Geiger-Müller counter because the Geiger-Müller counter may over-respond, and in general, an ion chamber is better suited for this purpose. If your radiation check at 1 meter is within the limits specified by the transportation index, then you can proceed to perform a wipe test on the surface of the package. For a wipe test, you need to know that you use a wipe over a 300 square centimeter surface of the package, and then you assay that wipe within a well counter to assess for any radiation. This is commonly called removable radiation. In terms of the limits for the wipe test, this can vary somewhat based on state and institution, but generally a number of 220 disintegrations per minute per centimeter squared is a common limit at which you would stop and notify your radiation safety officer. If your wipe test shows values under 220 disintegrations per minute per centimeter squared, you may be able to simply decontaminate the packaging and then proceed with opening, although you should still notify the radiation safety officer if the wipe test reveals no removable radiation, or if radiation is under something like 22 disintegrations per minute. You are typically good to go. Out of all of those numbers I just said for the wipe test, the one to remember is 300 centimeters square of surface, and the next most important one to remember is that you are allowed 220 disintegrations per minute per centimeter squared. If you pass the radiation check at 1 meter and the wipe test, you can now remove the packaging slip. When you look at the packaging slip, you should ensure that the correct material was sent to the correct site. So check that the recipient is your institution and that you have received what is expected. If all of that checks out, then you can open the outer and inner packaging and confirm that the contents match what is listed on the packing slip. Next, you would visually inspect the shielded container for any signs of damage. If the container does appear damaged, perform a wipe test on the container and assay in the well counter to see if there is radiation on the container surface. If there is no visual damage, then you can proceed with removing and using the radioactive material. Now, once you have removed the radiation from the package, you are not done with the package. You must remove the radioactive label and discard it. You are not allowed to discard radiation packaging with a label in place. This needs to be effaced and removed from the package. That is something that is testable. So remember, you cannot discard the container with the radioactive label in place. Remember that you must always record the receipt of your package, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission requires these records to be kept for 3 years. And if you are in an agreement state, which we'll talk about shortly, your individual state may require you to hold the record for longer, perhaps up to 5 years. But at a minimum, you must hold these records for 3 years. And if they are asking you a question on the board examination, they would anchor this off the Nuclear Regulatory Commission requirement of 3 years. The empty, reusable shipping box may be returned to the vendor, but you must first ensure that there is no contamination on the package and, if necessary, decontaminate the package. And remember to remove the radiation label before the vendor picks it up again. Let's talk about a few questions. First, what is an agreement state? Each state can form an agreement with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that they will provide the primary oversight of radioactive materials in their own state, and thus they become an agreement state. Agreement states cannot have rules that are less strict than that of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, but they are allowed to have rules that are more strict. For example, a requirement to maintain records for longer than what the NRC requires. In a non-agreement state, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission automatically oversees all reactor byproduct materials. That includes materials such as technetium-99m or iodine-131 because those both come from nuclear reactor byproducts. Even in a non-agreement state where the NRC has primary oversight, individual states still automatically oversee all cyclotron-produced radioactive materials such as F-18 for PET imaging or iodine-123 because that is cyclotron-produced. Individual states also oversee X-ray sources such as mammography units, and they oversee naturally occurring radioactive materials. For agreement states, the state agrees to oversee all radioactive materials, whether it comes from a nuclear reactor or a cyclotron, and all of the rules must be at least as strict as that of the NRC. Next question, what should I know about radiation safety labels? First, there are different colors. Actually, there are only 2 colors, white or yellow. There is one white label, and this is called White 1, which is logical, and there are 2 yellow labels, which are called Yellow 2 and Yellow 3. So in order, they go White 1, Yellow 2, Yellow 3. In order from the lowest shipped activity to the highest shipped activity is White 1, Yellow 2, and Yellow 3. So simply by looking at the label color on the package, you have an idea if the package is low radiation or potentially higher radiation. If you look and the package has a white label, there's only one of these, so you know it's a White 1 package, and this will have low levels of radiation inside. If you look and see a yellow label, that could either be Yellow 2 or Yellow 3, and those have higher levels of radiation that are shipped. The transportation index is 0 for a White 1, meaning that at 1 meter you will not detect any radiation. It must be less than 1 millirem per hour for a Yellow 2 label, and 1 to 10 millirems per hour for a Yellow 3 label. The Yellow 3 also has a provision where you can get special permission called exclusive use provisions, and with an exclusive use provision you can transport radioactive material that exceeds 10 millirems per hour at 1 meter. To review quickly again, a transportation index of 0 is White 1, less than 1 millirem per hour is Yellow 2, 1 to 10 millirems per hour is Yellow 3, and a Yellow 3 with exclusive use provision can have over 10 millirems per hour. By virtue of the label type, you also need to know what the maximum radiation level at the surface is. For a White 1 label, you are allowed 0.5 millirems per hour. For a Yellow 2 label, you are allowed levels up to 50 millirems per hour. For a Yellow 3 label, you are allowed measurements at the surface up to 200 millirems per hour. And for a Yellow 3 with exclusive use provisions, you are allowed surface levels of radiation up to 1,000 millirems per hour. So to review again, at the surface, White 1, 0.5 millirems. Yellow 2, 50 millirems. Yellow 3, 200 millirems. And with special permission, you can go up to 1,000 millirems with a Yellow 3. On my website, www.theradiologyreview.com, I am posting a study guide that illustrates and shows all of this in text and in tables, and I suggest that you go to the website and download this free study guide. Next question, how quickly must I complete the package check-in process? You have 3 hours to survey at 1 meter and complete your surface wipe test from when the package is delivered if the facility is open. If you are open and they deliver a radioactive package, you have 3 hours to survey this. If the package is delivered after hours, then you have 3 hours from the start of the next business day to complete the radiation surveys. Next question, I know how to receive radioactive materials, but what do I do with the waste? The answer to this is that we allow radioactive waste to decay in storage. That means we store it for a specified amount of time to allow the radiation to decay. You must store waste until the associated radiation decays to background levels, as measured by a Geiger-Müller counter. Remember that Geiger-Müller counters are most sensitive for very low levels of radiation, so are ideally suited in this setting to make sure that there is no residual radiation above background levels. This requires storage for 10 half-lives to reach background levels of radiation. Once you have done so, you can discard of these materials in regular trash. And remember, you must remove any radioactive labels before doing so. While these materials are in storage and radioactive, they do need to be secured, isolated, and shielded. Let's go through one more rapid-fire summary of the process to receive a package. First, wear gloves and your radiation monitoring badge. Second, inspect the package for visual signs of damage or leak. Third, check for external radiation first at 1 meter and then at the surface. The radiation level at 1 meter must fall below that of the transportation index, and you will wipe 300 square centimeters of the surface of the package, and this should typically fall below 220 disintegrations per minute per centimeter squared. Next, you remove the packing slip if everything above is okay. Then you open the outer and inner packaging and confirm that the contents match that of the packaging slip. Then you visually inspect the shielded container from the inner packaging for damage, and if everything looks okay, you can remove the radioactive material to your hot lab, and do not forget to remove the radioactive labels and discard. You must then record the receipt of your package and store this record for at least 3 years, according to NRC guidelines. Finally, you can return the empty, reusable shipping box back to the vendor, but only after you have ensured that there is no radiation contamination on the package and the radiation label has been removed. A white 1 label will have no detectable radiation at 1 meter and less than 0.5 millirems per hour at the surface. A yellow 2 label will have less than 1 millirem per hour at 1 meter and less than 50 millirems per hour at the surface. A yellow 3 label will have 1 to 10 millirems per hour at 1 meter and less than 200 millirems per hour at the surface. And the yellow 3 with exclusive use provisions will have greater than 10 millirems per hour at 1 meter and less than 1,000 millirems per hour at the surface. These are all values that are tested. Those types of questions are usually very straightforward as long as you have those values in your memory. Remember to go to my website, theradiologyreview.com, to check out the study guide I've made available. Finally, I do want to share some exciting news that the Radiology Review podcast is now just over a month old. And during the first month, there have been several days where the Radiology Review podcast entered onto the Apple Podcast Education chart for the top 100 most downloaded podcasts. I will do my best to continue to improve the podcast and make this as valuable for each of you as possible. Thank you, and I will catch you next time. Content of this podcast is provided for informal educational purposes only for radiology trainees and radiologists. Medical practitioners, please make your own independent assessment before suggesting a diagnosis or recommending any course of treatment. This podcast should not be used for self-diagnosis or self-treatment and is not a substitute for independent professional medical care. Please consult your own physician regarding any diagnosis, imaging interpretation, or course of treatment.